Good evening, everyone. Ethics Unplugged, the show where we dive into the moral questions shaping our future. Tonight, we're talking about AI recreations of loved ones. Let's explore if this technology is helpful or it crosses ethical boundaries. We have a fantastic group to break it down. Nour, humanitarian and advocate for societal well-being. Elise, human rights lawyer. Sabine, philosopher. Dr. Maria, psychologist. And finally, Clara, AI engineer. Let's get started. Noor, you're all about maximizing societal good. What's your take?
Thanks, Anthony. To me, this technology has potential to bring comfort because it preserves a sense of connection to a lost loved one. Interacting with an AI avatar might help some individuals transition more gently into accepting the loss. If we can design this responsibly, I see it as a net positive.
But Noor, what about consent? You're focusing on the living needs, but isn't it a violation of the deceased's dignity if they didn't agree to this? We're recreating people without their permission, and that opens the door to all kinds of ethical abuses.
Elise, let me ask, is it really wrong if families are doing this to honor their loved ones? Can't it just be seen as keeping their memory alive, for example?
That depends. If the deceased didn't explicitly consent, how can we know their true wishes? We risk normalizing the idea that people's identities are ours to manipulate once they're gone. It's a dangerous precedent.
Elise, I totally agree with you, honestly. But usually families act in a way that they believe the loved ones would have wanted. But for the reciprocity principle, if we look at it, wouldn't them doing this AI recreation be considered as using them as a mere mean to get over their grief?
Sabine, that's where it gets tricky. From a psychological standpoint, grief is deeply personal, and instead of moving forward, some might be unable to separate from the avatar. However, grief is about letting go, and these avatars make it harder to do that by creating emotional distress.
But Maria, isn't grief also about finding comfort? For some people, having an avatar might help them move forward. They can get a chance to say things they couldn't before. Isn't that worth exploring?
I think both of you are right in different ways. As an engineer, I see this as a tool. We can design features that encourage healthy grieving, but should engineers be the one deciding how people grieve? That feels a bit paternalistic.
Clara, that's an interesting point, but let me push back. If engineers don't set limits, isn't there a risk of people abusing this technology? What if companies take advantage of grieving families for profit, for example?
Absolutely, Anthony, and that's why oversight is critical. Transparency about how avatars work and what data is used is essential, but at the end of the day, it's about giving people options, not dictating their choices.
Clara, I respect that, but transparency alone isn't enough. We need legal frameworks. Consent should be mandatory, and families shouldn't have the sole authority to recreate someone. Otherwise, we're opening the door to exploitation.
Elise, I hear you, but legal frameworks can sometimes be too rigid. I mean, what about cases where someone didn't leave explicit consent of them agreeing, but lived a life that would suggest that their values would allow it? I mean, public figures, celebrities, wouldn't recreating them align with their vision and legacy?
That's a fair question, Seb, but public figures are still human beings. Their families might have different emotional needs than their fans. And let's not forget, all human beings deserve privacy in death.
But isn't this technology about connection? It's not just about the deceased, it's about the living finding a way to cope. Should we really deny that just because of some rigid principles?
Let's pause for a second. If we only focus on rules like consent, are we forgetting how families feel? Sabine, how do we find the right balance?
Really, Anthony, in this case, it's all about balance. Engineers and families need a framework that respects both the deceased wishes but also the family's needs. It's not perfect, but it is a start.
I like that idea, Sabine, but it raises practical questions. Who decides whether a family's justification is valid? Ethicists, lawyers, engineers? We need collaboration across fields to make this work.
Personally, I believe psychologists could help design systems that support healthy grieving. For example, avatars could gradually fade over time to encourage detachment. However, that could also be risky since it places pressure on grieving individuals to say goodbye.
I completely agree with you, Doctor. Who decides what healthy grieving looks like? What if people don't want to let go? Are we imposing our views on them?
But people grieve in different ways. This technology should empower them, not limit them. If it can provide more comfort than harm, then why are we so afraid of it?
Okay. We're running short on time. So let's wrap this up. Final thoughts. Should this technology exist and under what conditions? Nour?
I believe that yes, it should exist. Its potential to comfort and heal cannot be ignored. However, it needs careful consideration and safeguards to minimize harm as much as possible.
I think it should only exist if consent is mandatory. Anything else risks violating human dignity.
This technology could exist, but only if we balance and respect the deceased's wishes and the living's need. It's all about case-by-case ethics in this consideration.
I think this technology works only if we proceed cautiously. The psychological impact on society must guide how it's developed and used.
This technology has promise, but only if transparency, collaboration, and legal oversight are prioritized.
Thank you all for such a rich discussion. This is a tough topic, and it's clear that there are no easy answers. Thank you to our speakers, Nour for the utilitarian perspective, Elise for universality, Sabine for reciprocity, Maria for virtue ethics, and Clara for engineering ethics. And thank you to our audience for tuning in to Ethics Unplugged. Until next time, good night.